Jerusalem Online, I'm Mike Greenspan. It was one of those mornings when you had to say, thank God I wasn't there. Thank God none of my family or friends were. And then you simply had to weep, as if they had been there, because in many cases they actually were. By the end of the day, an entire nation was weeping. 25 people, including 2 American students, were killed, and more than 80 were wounded when 2 Palestinian suicide bombers attacked, one in a bus in Jerusalem, the other at a soldiers' hitchhiking stop in Ashkelon on the Mediterranean coast. The attacks came just days after Israel reopened its crossing points with the Palestinian autonomous areas, closed earlier to prevent just such actions. In the wake of the bombings came familiar scenes, the grisly spectacle of rabbinical workers collecting scattered body parts for burial, the heartrending scenes of grieving families and friends gathered at gravesides, struggling with their emotions, the shouts of angry demonstrators condemning the murderers and Israel's peace process with the Palestinians, and the determined words of Prime Minister Shimon Peres vowing to battle terrorism while continuing to make peace. At the end of the day, all that was left was the flicker of memorial candles, silent testimony to feelings all too familiar. And then the very next day, those feelings returned in a wave of confusion. A Palestinian American drove his car into a crowded bus stop north of Jerusalem, killing 2 people and injuring another 20. When he got out of his car, 3 Jewish religious students opened fire, killing him. Initial reports called the event a terror attack. Police investigations raised the possibility it might have been a terrible accident. Revelations that the driver was a devout Muslim and a former drug addict raised further questions. They remain unanswered. Only the tragedy remains. Tragedies and feelings, grief and anger, and a sense that in the midst of the peace process, this country is still very much at war. Those feelings are bound to have an impact on Israel's national elections just 3 months away. But on today's Look at the People and the Stories Behind the News, we're going to focus on the human side of the story. The story of an 8-year-old boy, orphaned when both of his parents were killed in the Jerusalem bus bombing. The story of a television cameraman among the first at the scene of the carnage, and a revealing look at the emotions behind his viewfinder. And the story of a friend, the friend of 2 Americans killed in the Jerusalem bus bombing. But because life in Israel continues despite the threat of fundamentalist terrorism, this week's show also brings you the story of Israel's Yiddish theater, alive and well and speaking an old language to a new generation. This and more on today's show. But first, the story of an 8-year-old boy from Jerusalem, orphaned by terror. This report from Israel's Channel 2 News.
זה אבא שהוא בעבודה, לא שלא בעבודה, שהוא במסעדה, שהיה למישהו יום הולדת, ואז הוא גם בא.
For Vladik Kushnirov, Daddy will remain only a memory. The same goes for Mommy. Yesterday at 7 in the morning, Vladik and his 5-month-old brother Tomer were orphaned.
היה פיצוץ, ואמא ואבא שלי היו באוטובוס הזה, והם בטעות הם ישבו על יד האיש שרצה לפוצץ את האוטובוס, והם נפגעו קשה מאוד, ואז הביאו אותם לבית חולים, ועשו להם ניתוח, ולא הצליחו להציל אותם.
Mommy and Daddy, Jana and Anatoly Kushnirov, were happy the morning of the explosion, very happy. They were on their way to Ashkelon to finalize the purchase of a new apartment. Since they made Aliyah from the Ukraine 2 years ago, they have lived in this building in Jerusalem.
איך אני רואה את הדברים? אני רואה את הדברים בסדר, כי יישארו איתי סבא וסבתא שלי והדודה והדוד. אני רואה את הדברים לא כל כך טוב, אבל אפשר, מה לעשות? חייבים להמשיך את החיים, מה לעשות?
Life does go on, and Vladik goes to the funeral to say goodbye, one last time, to his parents. Still, it's hard for him to comprehend that Mommy and Daddy are being buried here today. And there he stood for one very long hour. In the beginning, he only peeked at the freshly dug grave, but later, He stood there, deep in thought, not allowing anyone to interrupt him.
אני מתגעגע כבר מאתמול. אני רוצה להתגבר.
Eight-year-old Vladik. All he wants to do is overcome. When Jerusalem Online continues, we're going to meet one of the people who put the bus bombing story on your television screens and find out what he was feeling when he did. Stay with us. Jerusalem Online. Don't miss it.
We saw a city built on hope and touched a wall that touched us back. We swam under a crystal waterfall hidden in the desert and explored mysteries that we had only read about. And we watched as children danced to melodies 2,000 years old. In Israel, we found something we didn't even know we were looking for. Ourselves. Israel, no one belongs here more than you.
Jerusalem Online continues now. My next guest is a veteran member of a small and very exclusive fraternity, the network news cameramen who cover this country and this region so that you can keep abreast of what's happening. News cameraman Gavri Hefer has seen it all, but has he become inured to what he sees? We'll ask him. Welcome, Gavri.
Welcome.
You were among the first cameramen to arrive at the scene of the bus explosion in Jerusalem. You were shooting for Associated Press. We're going to see in a few moments a self-censored version of some of the footage you shot, some very hard footage to watch. One of the things that always amazes me is that you can look at things like you were looking at and still keep cool enough to do your job, to think rationally about what to shoot. Are you really that cool while you're shooting?
Mike, it's not a matter of being cool or not being cool. I remember 25 years ago when I was a youngster on the scene of the hardcore news, of everything that happened with the terrorist attack in Israel in the 70s. The difference is today that as soon as I switch off the camera and I go to the edit room, I have a switch in my brain as well. I don't remember, I don't look at it, I don't talk about it afterwards. I don't go to bed with dreams about it. And I have a mechanical switch to protect me to go on the next scene.
If you take the sum total of all the things that you've seen and experienced, even if you don't think that you feel them, don't you think that all of these experiences have had an effect on you, Gavri Hefer, not the cameraman, the human being?
Of course. It had an effect. I think because I was able to survive in such a demanding field as far as in Hebrew shchika, you said.
Wears you out,
so wears out, and some people are able to stick to this field, and at time I think that it's a bug, it's a virus that I'm contaminated with, I'm sick with, and I needed to wake up in the morning to get my adrenaline shot, and I'm looking for the next scene. When I'm behind the lens, I know that something is terribly happening. I'm looking for the good shot. I'm looking for the unusual thing to bring out to the public.
Does it ever happen that when you're shooting a scene like you saw 2 days ago, the bus bombing, that you're tempted to put down the camera and go help the victims?
Well, it doesn't happen to me because I wouldn't know how to help. I'm not a medic. I wasn't a medic in the army. I think I would do more harm. But it happened that, of course, that I took wounded people from bus attacks and I put them on private cars, and I put off the camera, but not before that. I had first shot
First you did your job.
The first arrival I have to shoot.
Gavri, to sum up, pick 3 words to describe the pictures that you took after the bus bombing in Jerusalem.
It was a horrified scene. I've never seen such an effect of explosion in a bus where bodies are flying out 50 to 100 meters and scattered in a parking lot, and you don't know what you're walking on, and wherever you turn the lens, you have just a mess of human flesh all around you. Just terrible thing to think about it. I usually like to switch it off.
Gavri Hefer, news cameraman, you've seen it all. Thanks for telling us about it. A look through the television viewfinder, and upcoming, an American in Jerusalem mourning murdered friends, right after this.
Jerusalem Online headlines. I'm Ziva Cohen. This week, another success for Israel's aircraft industry. A happy ending to a tragic story. A special treat for music fans in Jericho. Israel, for the second time, successfully launched its Arrow missile off the Mediterranean coast. The anti-ballistic missile system is designed to intercept and destroy incoming missiles. The mostly American-funded program may be operational as early as next year. Israel's former foreign minister David Levy, who broke away from the Likud opposition party to found his own party, may be on his way back. Newspaper reports say former Defense Minister Arik Sharon is conducting sensitive negotiations on the terms of Levy's return to the Likud. If he agrees, it will be a major success for opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu. He is trying to unite the major right-wing parties under the Likud banner. In a rare archaeological find near the Dead Sea, Hebrew University scientists unearthed a workshop which produced balsamic oil used to anoint the kings of the ancient world. This bath, guarded inside a fortress, stored the precious oil. Researchers can now better understand balsam oil production, also used for medicines and expensive perfumes in biblical times. Before entering surgery, 70-year-old Yosef Lax had one request. He asked to see the boy whose life he saved from a near-fatal attack by Rottweiler dogs. When he spotted the 7-year-old in danger, Lax jumped in, risking his own life when the attacking dogs then turned on him. The two escaped the traumatic event, and the boy was able to personally thank his rescuer. They are recovering in a hospital, side by side. It's not every day one of Israel's leading pop stars makes a quick hop into the West Bank city of Jericho. Zahava Ben was the first Israeli ever to perform in an autonomous Palestinian city. Singing in Hebrew and Arabic, she was warmly greeted by fans familiar with her Oriental-style music. Some couldn't even stay in their seats. I'm Ziva Cohen for Jerusalem Online.
Among the victims of the Jerusalem bus bombing were 2 Americans. Matthew Eisenfeld from Connecticut, a rabbinical student on an Israel study year program, and his girlfriend Sara Duker from New Jersey. Their bodies were flown back to the United States for burial, but many of their friends remained behind here in Israel, among them my next guest, Eddie Bernstein. Eddie, welcome. You're from Chicago, also a rabbinical student here in Jerusalem,
yes,
correct?
That's correct.
This must have been quite a shock for you.
It was indeed. I live not too far from where the explosion occurred. I live just down Rehov Jaffa Street near the Shuk, and I heard the explosion at 6:30. But it's a noisy neighborhood, and I hear sounds all the time. But it only sank in a little later, and then I got the word about my dear friends, and I've just been a wreck since.
I'm not surprised. Matthew and Sara, they were boy and girlfriend. They were here for serious purposes. They were looking to build at least part of their future here. What more can you tell us about them?
They were always kind and generous and loving. They had each had a cheery disposition. I've known them I knew them each separately. I was friendly with Matt. We were roommates for a long period of time, and he was always just so intelligent, so energetic, and I think one thing that characterizes both of them, one of their greatest qualities, was they stood for Klal Yisrael. They each were very comfortable with different kinds of Jews. They were comfortable in an Orthodox environment, in a conservative environment, in a secular environment.
They felt good here.
They were above denominationalism.
Eddie, when things like this happen, disasters of this sort, there are armies of psychologists who go into action immediately, counseling Israelis, helping them deal with the trauma, helping them deal with the grief. But you and your people were basically on your own. How did you deal with the fact that these two very good friends were dead?
Well, we do have our. I found that we did have a support group, and it has been helpful that we were all together and we reached out and we had rabbis with us. And it's very difficult, even if you have so much support. It's just a tragedy, and the only thing you can do is just cope, and it doesn't go away. The pain will stay.
Israelis have had to get used to more than their share of tragedy. They mourn their dead, they feel their feelings, and then a day or two later, almost as if there's no alternative, they get back to life as normal. They have to be here. You don't. You're here by choice. You're an American visiting in this country, in principle. How do you face your future here, and why do you continue to stay here after what happened?
It's a very scary time. I've been here. This is not my first time in Israel. I've been here during other terrible times, including the Baruch Goldstein massacre. It's not easy. I know it's tough, and I just feel committed to being here. I feel a commitment to Eretz Yisrael, and I think the very last thing Matt and Sara would want would be for me to leave Eretz Yisrael because of their death, because they were so dedicated to Israel.
A last question, and I don't really know how to ask it or if I should ask it, but what, if any, sense can you make of everything that's happened?
None. The only tiny bit of, I mean, it's terrible that what happened, but they died together. They were probably going to get married, and they died together, and they're going to be buried together, and that might be the one beautiful thing about this.
Eddie Bernstein, an American in Israel at a very tough time. Thank you for joining us today. That brings us to our POB, which, if you have something to say to Jerusalem Online in the way of questions, comments, or suggestions, is the address. And here it is. Jerusalem Online, POB 33003, Jerusalem, Israel. That's POB 33003 in Jerusalem. We can also be faxed at country code 972-2381658. That's 972-2381658. We look forward to hearing from you, and please do remember to tell us when and on what station you watch Jerusalem Online. When we return, a change of subject, a renaissance of Jewish theater in a language that's coming back to life right after this. We're back. Like Latin, not too long ago, Yiddish was considered a dead language, a relic from earlier times destined to disappear as Jews adopted the languages of their adopted countries around the world. But without fanfare, Yiddish in Israel is making a comeback, and my next two guests are living proof of that. Veteran Yiddish actor Shmuel Atzmon is now director of the Yiddish Spiel Yiddish Theater, and among his regular cast members is one of Israel's leading Hebrew-speaking actresses, his daughter, Anat. They join me now. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Shmuel Atzmon, Yiddish Spiel was founded 7 years ago in order to bring Yiddish theater back to life for a new generation in Israel, and you've just come back from a very triumphant appearance in the Yiddish Culture Month in Vienna, Austria, playing to packed houses. Who came to see the show? Who wants to see Yiddish theater?
First of all, in Europe is now Yiddish also very popular. People who are young people, students, many of them non-Jewish people, who consider Yiddish as an old German language, and they want to bring them back to their culture.
Anat, what is Yiddish? Is it German? Is it Hebrew? What is it?
I think it's a mix of old German, Hebrew, and all sort or mishmash of other languages in Europe.
Mishmash, one of those
Yes.
Yiddish words that's found its way into English, along with schlepper and chutzpah and a few others that everybody uses now, almost as universal as bagel and lox.
Yeah.
Shmuel Atzmon, let's take a look at a clip from one of your productions. What are we going to see now?
You're going to see one of our productions called the Chumash Lieder, the songs of the Bible. And it's a very popular and very good production, which I am thinking to bring it to the United States. We'll see a scene where Abraham, our forefather, and Sarah, our foremother, are sitting on a bench and trying to measure the shadow. Whose shadow is bigger, his or hers? I did it die. I did it die. I did it die. Schmeichel der alte Jidene Ed, West verspielen dem Gebet, danach wirst du weinen.
Kas die alte Leckisch Bär, sag wer wird das weinen, wer mein Kind noch meinen.
I did it die.
I did it die.
I did it die.
A cultured argument about the length of their shadows between Sarah and Abraham. I'm sitting with Shmuel and Anat Atzmon. Anat, in Israel, the Yiddish theater presents its shows with simultaneous translation to Hebrew because there's a whole generation of Israelis who don't speak Yiddish.
Yiddish goyim, we say.
Yiddish goyim. As a matter of fact, Yiddish was out of favor with the younger Israeli generation. They didn't want to hear the sound of that language. Has something changed? I mean, here you are acting in Yiddish. How did that happen, for example, other than the fact that your father's the director of the theater?
Yeah, I think a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, changed. I think that what happened is Israel is a very young country, as we all know, and in the beginning they didn't want to speak other languages, only Hebrew, and it was right, I think, because we had to build the country. But now, after we have a little bit, slang of Israelis or whatever, people start to feel that they want to go back to their
roots.
To their roots, yes. And
was it difficult for you to learn Yiddish? You didn't speak it as a child, right?
No, unfortunately, no.
This is my fault.
Yes, my father's fault and my mother.
It let you down. And now?
And now I at the beginning it was very difficult, but now, because I worked a lot with the language, it's easier.
Shmuel Atzmon, where do you find Yiddish-speaking actors, or do you have to teach all of them Yiddish?
First of all, we still have a very good bench of good actors, older
Veterans,
generation,
right.
veterans. But we now have young actors who are coming to just because the same what Anna said, and we established now a studio for professional young actors. 15 people are studying Yiddish, Yiddish culture, Yiddish literature, Yiddish songs, etc., to prepare them as the takeover of our theater from the younger generation.
Okay, let's take a look at another clip from a Yiddish Spiel production, or actually from two different productions, I believe. In fact, we're going to see you this time, Anat, cutting your teeth on Yiddish. A song between Adam and Eve starts us off, and afterwards we have another scene, a dialogue scene between, who is it, Jacob and Rebecca?
Rebecca. And both are...
Rachel.
We also have to mention the actors opposite, very famous actor, Israeli,
Gadi
Sabri
Yagil.
Gadi Yagil.
Ich bin Tage gewesen in der Rebbelallee, Sarah schwach Musiker nicht auf.
Shmulik Atzmon, next year, Yiddish Spiel is going to go off to the USA, hopefully with English translation. Maybe
Yes.
you'd like to tell our viewers why they should come and see Yiddish Spiel in America.
Lassen wir sich alle sehen, wir zusammen nach Jorachim bei euch mit unseren Vorstellungen in Florida, in New York und seid begrüßt. Shalom Aleichem und lassen wir sich sehen in Frieden.
I understood Florida and New York at least, and not in Shmulik Atzmon. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Schönen Dank.
And that brings us to the end of this week's Look at the People and the stories behind the news from Israel. A parting thought for you before we go. The Jewish world is about to celebrate Purim, a joyous holiday based on events that tradition says occurred back in ancient Persia. An evil advisor, so goes the story, to Persian King Ahasuerus, trying to persuade the monarch to kill his Jewish subjects. But Ahasuerus' Jewish queen, a girl named Esther, risked her own life to intercede. She saved the day for her people. In the end, it was Haman who was hanged. It's a story of good triumphing over evil, a story of salvation for the Jews. Purim, a very happy holiday, a time of mass merrymaking, meant to capture the joy of those ancient events. Well, thousands of years have passed since the first Purim, but the events of recent days make the message seem as fresh as today. You've been watching Jerusalem Online. I'm Mike Greenspan. Join me again next week. Shalom.